Conor McGregor spoke out about this because this is, it's crazy to see this in Ireland. I mean, they get mad over football matches and stuff. And then they brawl in the streets and they go back in the pub and they got another pint and then everything's fine. It's just wild to see this. But Conor McGregor spoke out. And he was immediately targeted as a result. I mean, there were protests and the riots and all of this stuff. And so Dublin native Conor McGregor spoke out. He was really critical of police leadership. He condemned the burning of vehicles and looting. There were some bad elements in it, of course. And he said that he tweeted, quote, innocent children ruthlessly stabbed by a deranged non-national in Dublin. Our chief of police, because apparently they said that it was a hooligan faction driven by far-right ideology. I'm so tired of hearing about that. I'm so tired of hearing far-right, hooligan, all of this other stuff. Come on. He said that there's grave danger. It should have never been here in the first place. And that there's been zero action done to support the public in any way with this frightening fact, right? And he's just said, God bless those attacked today. We're praying. That's all he said. That's all he said. And he said, I don't care about President Higgins' statement or that he's going through different leaders. He's like, announce your plan of action. Your statements are worthless. I mean, he's saying all you're doing is talking. You're not actually acting to, he said, fix the situation immediately. This is literally what he said. They act like he was out there calling for violence, and he wasn't. He said it was one of the most horrific crimes that they've ever seen, etc. So now he's being investigated. They're trying to attack him, saying that he committed hate speech because, they don't have freedom of speech there. They're trying to accuse him of hate speech because he criticized the police. He criticized some members of government for the way that they handled not just this Algerian immigrant, but immigration overall, which he says, is making, areas less safe. And he said, he's like, this is enough is enough. And now they're investigating him for, what is it? Online hate speech. Like, is there a different charge for in-person hate speech? But that's considered hate speech. But the Irish police commissioner, Drew Harris, he said that they were the riots were driven by a, quote, hooligan faction driven by far-right ideology. That's not hate speech. I mean, if you want to have a discussion about hate speech, why is the police commissioner, why does he get to make these accusations about everybody who was out in the streets? And that's not hate speech, but what Conor McGregor says is hate speech. There is this ploy that Western governments are engaged in where, and there was other video where you had Irish leaders that were angrier with the innocent Irish people that were speaking out against this. More so, they were saying, oh, well, this is violent. The violence was the guy stabbing children. That's the violence. That was the violence that needed to be called out. I mean, you got this guy out there stabbing everyone, but yet the people who reacted apparently to years of mismanagement from Irish police, years of looking the other way over immigration drama from Ireland's government, that's to criticize the government. That's hate speech. But the government can criticize innocent Irish people, and that's not. This is not something that's just Ireland. It's not something that's just the United States. This is in every Western government. There is an absolute strategy to get Western governments to turn on Western citizens. And by Western, I mean anything that's free. Anybody that has any modicum of freedom. That's what defines Western now. Is there freedom involved? Because then it's Westernized. But there is an absolute strategy to get governments to turn on people. Although, in some instances, it doesn't require much. Some governments have already sort of been against people in the first place. I mean, in the United States, we're crying out loud. Go and look back at the COINTEL stuff back in the 60s. I mean, go and look back in the days of Prohibition when poison was being slipped into alcohol in order to help the government with that whole I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there. That's not to say everything, but there's a lot. My point is that you're now being conditioned to be afraid to speak out about anything. They want to condition you to compromise your right of self-defense. They want to condition you to compromise your right to speech, particularly against the things that deserve the criticism, which was what free speech was designed for in the first place. It's slow, but it's sure. This is what they're trying to do. And this idea of a hooligan, first off, don't do stuff like this in Ireland if you don't want your ass beat. Excuse the Portuguese, but I'm going to lay it very straight. If you do not want to get beaten into a hole in the ground, do not do this in Ireland. I mean, there's a reason, and I can say this as someone whose great-grandparents were Irish. I can say it. You don't mess with the Irish like that. You just don't. I mean, that's like the one thing that you just don't do. That's like dropping down into a volcano and wondering why it's hot. It just doesn't make any sense. So, just saying, that's one of the things you just don't do. You're shocked. So they're investigating Conor McGregor. I mean, like that's going to scare him. There is, at some point, a line that you pass where you can only try to intimidate people with the threat of government for so long, with the threat of penalty, with the threat of control. And then at some point, those threats, even if made good, lose their leverage. And that's ultimately, that's the government should never have people living in fear of it. And I say this in the spirit of the founders. Government was always to fear the people's displeasure. They were to fear the losing the good esteem of the voter. That's how it's supposed to be. Somehow we got it twisted. But at some point, that threat of being investigated, being this, of being that, loses its leverage. It loses its power. And that's when when enough people realize that, and when enough people have had enough, and when enough people want a reckoning, that's when it gets sketchy. Sometimes I think that I'm not putting my tinfoil hat on yet. But I do have, I'm just going to because my hair's like really nice right now. I don't want to mess it up. But I will say this, because this thing, they can't think my thoughts right. We literally told them to send us this stuff. It's the Faraday hat. I will say this. I sometimes think that it definitely is a bait to try to get people to engage in civil conflict. Because at first, get people to argue with each other over identity politics. Then get people to, little skirmishes here and there. And then have it kick off into something bigger. That's kind of what it feels like. It's a plot to destabilize westernized governments and to get not just people to turn on their government, but people to turn against each other. And that's what it's not just the United States. Don't think that, we're special here in the U.S. I mean, in a way, we're a powerhouse of freedom, yes, but we are just as susceptible as anybody else. To see it happen in France, to see it happen in Britain, to see it happen in Ireland, and to witness it happening here in the United States. And I'm going to tell you something. It doesn't help that it gets convoluted with political egos, because there's a real threat. And I think that the pollution of the how do I put it? To distract from the very real threat of that in the U.S. with the political power jockeying and political egos. That's a pettiness, and that itself is dangerous, because it's forcing people to focus on, look, yes, Trump has issues. Some of Trump's issues are self-made. Some of them, I think, are highlighting a problem that has already existed, that people have been going through for quite some time. You can't take your eye off the ball, and that government can be weaponized this way. And you can't just focus on singularly one person, because you have to focus on what is wrong with the system. And I just feel like everybody's being baited. I really feel like everybody's being baited. We are in very weird times right now, dangerous times.